I'm the CEO of Worldwide Health Staff Solutions. And as excited as we are to bring you this topic today, I'm even far more excited to be joined by two gentlemen who are probably as close to the nurse immigration issue as any in the United States. We couldn't have two more informed, two more well-connected individuals to this issue. And I'll look forward to introducing Chris and John further here in just a moment. As always on our webinar presentations, please take a moment as you log on and just send us a note what country you are joining us from today. It's always interesting to us to see whether we have people from 15 or 20 or 25 different countries. So please take a moment and just do that. We have a lot of information to cover today, so I'm not going to take a lot of time by way of further introductory comments, other than to say, if you have questions or comments as we go along, please feel free to use the chat box on your screen, as many of you are doing now, to send us your questions. We have one of our colleagues who is monitoring questions behind the scene, and we're going to do our very, very best to answer those for you. We're also going to be absolutely sure that we stick to our allotted time of 1 hour. So with that being said, I'd like to jump right in. Let me begin by introducing Chris Musillo. Chris has joined us on previous webinars. Chris is the senior partner of Musillo Unkenhold, a large healthcare immigration law firm. But what positions Chris very uniquely is he's been very close to the drafting of various legislative proposals that have been brought forward over the last number of years. And so if you're wanting to hear about Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act and those sorts of things, Chris is the guy. Chris is definitely the guy. Also, very excited to be joined this morning by John Russell. John is with the Denton's Group in Washington, D.C. Working on this type of issue is what John does all day, every day. If I need to know who a contact is in a senator's office, I just need to reach out to John and I have an answer 5 minutes later. So I'm absolutely grateful to both Chris and John for joining us this morning, and I look forward to having them share their perspectives. Just so you know, the discussion today is completely unscripted. Chris and John and I, we have not met beforehand to sort of say this is the message we want to deliver. Chris and John are going to share with you what their sincere views of the matter are, as will I. So with that being said, CJ, if we can get to the next slide, please. So before we jump into today's topic, that's burning up social media and burning up the internet, what is going to happen specifically to nurse immigration now that Donald Trump has been elected for a second time? And I think as we prepare to consider that question, it's important to have maybe a little higher perspective, a little bit higher perspective. So here you can see we have the last 5 presidents of the United States dating back to 1993 in chronological order. Bill Clinton, a Democrat. George Bush, a Republican. Barack Obama, a Democrat. Donald Trump, a Republican. Joe Biden, a Democrat. And come January, we're going to have Donald Trump president for the next 4 years, Republican. The point I want to make here is that over many administrations that have had different views and different approaches to immigration, particularly as it relates to the EB-3 visa program, there really has been no substantive change to that program whatsoever. The good news is the program is stable, it's well established. A properly filed EB-3 petition has an almost virtual certainty of being approved. So just as we enter into our discussion today, yes, we're having a new administration. Yes, much is made in the media about their position on immigration. But let's remember Donald Trump was president previously for 4 years. And regardless of who's president now, if we look back over the last 5 administrations, really not a whole lot has changed. Okay, next slide. So there have been various efforts over the years to modernize the EB3 program, to update it, to make special provisions for nurses and doctors and others. And Chris, maybe I'll ask you to take a minute or two to just speak to what some of these legislative efforts have been over the years, and kind of, with maybe a bit of a focus on what's been attempted most recently.
Yeah, so Ron, first of all, thank you for asking me to participate in this. It's always good to get in front of everybody, and I'm sure around the world there's concern, there's a bit of an upheaval in the American political scheme, but as you, I think, really did a good job of stating at the top, this is not uncommon in American history. We've gone Democrats and Republicans back and forth pretty regularly over the last 25 or so years, which is, by the way, when Ron and I first met each other. So he and I have both been in this world of international healthcare recruitment going back really to the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
Some of the legislative efforts that we've seen in the recent past include the EAGLE Act and the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act. The purpose of the EAGLE Act was to eliminate the per country quotas that many of you may be familiar with. So if you look in the visa bulletin, each country of birth is limited to 7% of the overall green cards in a year. There's 140,000 employment-based visas. There's another 280,000 family-based visas. You add those together, you get 400,000 and change total green cards. And no country is allowed to use more than 7% of that total sum. So it's around the number of about 30,000 visas per year. That number can actually fluctuate a little higher if there's for reasons that probably aren't worth getting into. What the EAGLE Act essentially said is we, the U.S. government, would like to get rid of that, let's call it 30,000 immigrant visa annual cap. But in order to do that, what would have happened is that two countries, India and China, and in particular India, would have effectively used all of the 400 or so thousand visas, in particular the 140,000 on the employment side, for several years, because the Indian backlog, the Indian retrogression, if you will, is just so bad, especially in the employment-based category. And so since the government really didn't want that to happen, the EAGLE Act also included a 9-year phasing in period. And so over the course of 9 years, that phase in would have happened. And at the end of that period, then we would have had truly a country of birth blind immigration process. The most important part for healthcare workers is that the act, and in fact, John and I were in on some of these negotiations when the deal was cut maybe 6 or 7 years ago with the EAGLE Act, that would have actually carved out a special allotment for nurses for a period of time. The EAGLE Act went through a few different variations because it never ended up getting passed, but there was at least 3 or 4 different variations of it. But the key thing is that there was a carve out, there was a certain set aside for healthcare workers, and that set aside would have existed for roughly the same amount of time as that phase in. Again, I'm being a little vague because it changed a little bit from time to time, depending on the version of the EAGLE Act. So essentially, we would have had a phase in over about 9 years. And then over that 9 years, we also would have had a set aside just for healthcare workers. Nonetheless, the EAGLE Act has really had difficulty getting passed over the years. It probably would have been slightly good for healthcare workers in the short run, and perhaps not so great in the long run. But nonetheless, that didn't pass. The Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, another bill that John and I, along with Ron, worked on quite a bit, over the last maybe 2 or 3 congressional terms, so about 4 or 5 years. That bill, which is currently in front of Congress right now and has about 20 or 25 senators who've co-sponsored it, and maybe as many as 40 or 50 House members who've co-sponsored it, which are really good numbers. There's 100 senators, and so anytime you get 20 or 25% of the Senate staff who've agreed to it, and it's almost a 50-50 breakdown of Democratic senators and Republican senators, that's really good. And on the House side, we have 50 out of 400 and something, so that's still a pretty good percentage. Unfortunately, anything in immigration is really hard to get passed in Congress. There's still a small chance that the HWRA is passed in the next, there's about 6 weeks left in this congressional term. I don't want to overstate the likelihood of that happening, though. It's probably unlikely, but there is still a glimmer of hope. And John and I were actually on a call yesterday talking with folks on how that glimmer might turn into something more robust. That bill essentially, there's a lot of nuance to it, but I think the most important takeaway is would essentially eliminate retrogression for nurses and their families for a period of about 3 years. And then even in 4, 5, and 6 years, the retrogression would either be non-existent or very low because we would have essentially eliminated the backlog that currently exists. So that bill would obviously be great for nurses. There's also a component of that bill that would, broadly speaking, provide a similar relief for doctors as well. But again, so those are the two bills. My guess is my guess is most likely neither get passed in the next 6 weeks, although again, glimmer of hope. But my guess is some form of both of those bills is introduced next year, although it's a little early to talk about that just quite yet. So Ron, that's sort of a real quick flyover of some of the important legislation that's been
passed. Good. Chris, very good. CJ, next slide, please. So, John, I'll turn this one to you. Immigration issues that came to the fore in the first Trump administration. If you just kind of scan the media, you would think that maybe not a single immigrant entered the country during that time. But if you could just from your recollection, share the good, bad, and the otherwise maybe ugly of how these various visas were affected in the first Trump term.
I'd be happy to. And let me also, as Chris did, thank you, Ron, for the opportunity here to be with you all, and happy to answer any questions you may have going through this. But I think what's important to remember about the first term of Donald Trump was the chaos, and I use that word on purpose, of the opening days of his administration. You'll recall that's when a somewhat poorly crafted, what became known as a Muslim ban, executive order came through. You'll see he also did with the F1s, he started to try and limit those dramatically. He tried with the H-1B program. He is not necessarily a fan of. The funny thing is his business interests have availed themselves of that program. But what the larger issue here is, it is illegal immigration versus legal immigration. And the Trump administration's focus in the first term was dramatically on illegal immigration. You recall that's when the wall started. The southern wall was started to be built along our border with Mexico. The focus on deportations was high. And the president faced significant pushback from Congress. So he had to do a lot of this through executive orders. I think what's really important, though, to remember through all the chaos, and certainly as COVID started up again, and that brought its own, or excuse me, not again, as COVID started up and that brought its own limitations into the country, the EB-3 visa for healthcare workers was prioritized by the Trump administration. The administration understood the value of the legal side of the immigration question and understood the need for nurses in the country. So while, yes, there was significant noise about limiting the ability for people to come into the United States, and certainly a focus on those entering the United States illegally, the EB-3 visa for healthcare workers was in fact highlighted as, and I use this term sparingly, as the good immigration because it was the employment-based immigration.
Thank you. CJ, if we could go to the next slide, please. So Chris, I'll give you this one. I don't know if it's an easy or a hard one, but here comes. So John just spoke to us about the 4 years of the previous Trump administration. Chris, can you just share some insights into your take of what's been happening the last 4 years under the Biden administration?
Yeah, I mean, the reality, of course, is that the Biden administration has been more friendly in immigration issues, certainly more friendly on the undocumented illegal immigration issues than the Trump administration, but probably also more friendly to legal immigration. I think that's probably safe to say, based on that 16 to 20 timeframe versus the 20 to 24 timeframe. So, for instance, with F1 student visas, we saw much lower rates of denials during the Biden administration, which doesn't mean that we saw high denials during the Trump administration, and I do not expect high rates of denials in the forthcoming Trump administration. Having said that, it's going to be much more important that applicants for F1 student visas really have their applications as tightly drafted and legally correct as possible. On the EB-3 visa cards, the green cards, the immigrant visas, where frankly the vast majority of folks like nurses come into the United States, there's 140,000 immigrant visas issued per year. That number, exactly 140,000, was issued every year from 2016 to 2020, and every year from 2020 to 2024. So if there's one prediction I can make, is that there will be 140,000 employment-based visas, of which 40,000 of them will be EB-3s at least, will be issued over the next 4 years. So that number won't change at all. Will we see higher rates of RFEs and maybe even higher rates of denials, which require refiling? Yeah, I think perhaps that's the case. That's what we saw last time. But I think the big takeaway is that exactly the same amount of employment-based green cards that were issued during the Trump administration were also issued during the Biden administration. With the H-1B special occupations, same thing. There's 85,000 new H-1Bs issued every year from 2016 to 2020, and we also saw the same thing from 2020 to 2024. So I think the takeaway is that during the Biden administration, we saw less sort of administrative headache type issues, Ron, which is certainly a nicer place to live,
Sure.
but it's not. But the overall biggest picture things, which is the number of visas issued, really were exactly identical in 16 to 20 as they were in 20 to 24.
That, Chris. I hope what everybody is able to see from the comments this morning, from the information that Chris and John are sharing, our goal here is to provide impartial information, commenting on the issues as we understand them. We're in no way looking to make any political point one way or the other, and I do hope you're finding this conversation to be helpful. Next slide, please, CJ. All right, John, you drew the short straw to get this one, but here we go. Immigration issues that you see as being possibly forthcoming in Trump round 2.
So I think, and this gets a little bit into details, but I think it's important. So I will try and go slow. We do not expect significant legislation in coming out of Congress to address immigration here in the early months of the Trump administration. Instead, we expect the president himself, using his presidential powers and executive orders, to begin to direct his agencies to accomplish his goals. So it's not necessarily going around Congress. This is, in fact, an avenue that is available to the president. But what it also allows for is those that are against these wishes, against his executive order, to use the courts and sue to either overturn them, stop them, or in sometimes they do, in fact, get confirmed. But what that does mean is things slow down. If they've gone into the courts, things slow down. So please keep that in the back of your minds. I know that's a little very deep congressional U.S. government stuff, but it's important to remember. And the president-elect, clearly believes he has a mandate of the support of the American public to address illegal immigration. And he looks to do that, as the slide says, top is to finish construction of the southern border wall. He also has talked a significant amount and has put people in positions to do this, of rounding up illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, who at the moment, and I think this is very important to keep in the back of your head, those that are in charge of enforcing his plan are looking for threats to national security. They are looking for those, if you think of it, it's gang members and others that have criminal records that are here in the United States without documentation. That is who they are looking to go for. I have to say that in the United States, our campaigns can be somewhat vicious, and part of what that viciousness is are the campaign commercials. And those campaign commercials do give you a sense of exactly where the administration wants to go. This campaign ran a majority of their ads about the dangers posed by undocumented workers. There is a concern, of course, that our economy, the United States economy, needs workers to come from other countries to fill our open jobs. And how are we going to balance this need to get those here that are get those out that are undocumented and pose a threat, with those that can bring value to the United States? And again, I want to flag the EB-3 visa and nurses is about as valuable to the United States as you can get in this debate at the moment. I also want to flag that there will be significant hysteria, and I use that word, that's the word I chose, which to me means confusion and concern at levels that maybe aren't necessarily warranted, because this is a hot button issue in the United States. There are significant concerns, and those that are opposed to what the president wants to do will be very loud and will be very vocal and will push to do everything they can to stop it. I think you have to kind of churn down the noise a little bit and pay attention to what the big picture is here. And that big picture is build a southern wall so that you can, in fact, control those that are coming in from the south of our country, the United States. The second is get those that pose a threat to communities in the United States out of the United States. Get those that have a criminal record out of the United States. And then I think the administration is going to be in a position to actually, and I don't think this is going to come immediately, but there's a great hope that once you have kind of cleared the decks, if you will, you have begun to implement these policies, that you can turn to actually broader immigration reform. I said that's a hope. I don't expect it in the opening months of this administration. I do expect it to be much more enforcement orientated. However, I do believe that this is an issue that legislators do want to tackle. They're going to let the president have a little bit of room here. They're going to let him do what he says he's wanted to do, because Americans have supported it. And then I think they're going to try and pivot further into his administration to address it. We'll see if that actually does come out. But here in the short term, this is enforcement. And we, of course, are not part of who they're looking for. on that enforcement part.
So it speaks to this reality that the EB3 program has existed in near to its current form for a long time and is likely to continue to do so for at least the foreseeable future.
Yes.
Chris, can you share any thoughts you might have on the possibility of nursing being considered or nursing being designated a STEM occupation?
Yeah, so the way the STEM occupation works, Ron, is it's most important for those who are studying in the United States. So if you're studying in the United States, you enter the United States on what's called an F1 visa. And you can go to school for 1, 2, typically 4 years, perhaps even longer if you want to go to graduate school. So it's not uncommon for an international nursing student to come to the United States and enter the United States on a student visa and maybe get a BSN here in the United States, a Bachelor's of Science of Nursing. So they graduate with a Bachelor's of Science of Nursing, which allows them a 1-year OPT, optional practical training, which means for the year after they graduate, even though they don't have an EB3 visa or they don't have an H-1B visa or any other kind of visa, they are actually legally allowed to stay in the United States and legally allowed to work essentially as a tryout, if you will. And that program, that OPT program, is a 1-year post-curriculum training program. STEM occupations, however, are allowed 3 years in optional practical training. And STEM programs are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And none of those sound like nursing. And so nursing does not qualify as a STEM occupation. However, we are seeing increasing universities, which are really leaning into the technological age and the informatics and analytics age, that are merging, especially graduate programs in nursing with technology programs, such that they are creating STEM programs in majors, educational majors like nursing informatics, for instance, is one that I've seen really pop up in the last near term. And so if one graduates with a master's in a nursing informatics program, they are actually allowed 3 years of post-education employment on that OPT. And they can work in any nursing occupation. So if they get a nurse informatics degree and then their post-education job is really can be nursing, or it can be more informatics, or a blending of the two. And so it's not uncommon, or it's becoming increasingly more common, for someone with a nurse informatics degree to then go and get 3 years OPT in a fairly standard nursing occupation. And what's nice about that is, even with the retrogression, which is currently 2 years, if the green card is filed very early in that practical training program, the nurse, the overseas nurse who's here in the United States, can actually obtain their EB3 degree, their EB3 immigrant visa before the expiration of their 3-year STEM OPT. There's a lot of acronyms in there, but I think I explained that.
Good. John, just real quick, let's assume that the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act doesn't get passed by January of this year. What, if any, immigration reform proposals, legal immigration reform proposals, do you think might be brought forward in the first 6 months of the next administration?
That's a good question, Ron. I think, remember that the politics of this will drive a lot of what we see members put in. And so that is, we're talking about DACA programs again. We will talk about, certainly there'll be, though the funding will be there, there'll be discussions in and around the wall. I think you're going to see the usual suspects appear in the legislation, and in legislation being submitted. And that's because I think what members want to do is stake out positions so that, in fact, should the dam break, that and legitimate reform be discussed, I think that's when these members will have their legislation out there. They'll have a few co-sponsors, and they'll be able to turn to that as kind of a basis for it. But remember that most of the immigration bills that we track on a daily basis, even to the, if you think about the HWRA or the EAGLE Act, these are legislation that have been around for multiple Congresses. So do we think the EAGLE Act will come back? Absolutely. Will it have a better chance of passing this time than it did last year or last Congress or the Congress 4 Congresses before? Probably not. So I think that's what we have to be prepared for or that's what we are preparing for, is that we will see a number of the old reliables be put out as place markers for an impending debate. I do not think that they get cobbled together and moved here within the first 2 years of the Trump administration. I think instead they are used for setting the tone of the debate.
Very good. CJ, next slide, please. So I'll just speak to this, and then I'll ask Chris and John to add to the conversation. I think one of the main purposes of spending this time with you today and having Chris and John join is we want you to stay informed, and we want you to avoid the hysteria. There is no shortage of hysteria, and it's really important, the sources of information that you look to, as best as you can, and I'm not even sure that this is 100% possible, but avoid one-sided political commentary. Internet speculation is the last thing that you want to be paying attention to. The last thing. And last but not least, the ever true, if it sounds too good to be true, it almost certainly is. Chris, John, any additional thoughts to add?
Yeah,
go ahead, John.
I couldn't agree with you more. We are in an incredibly charged political environment. We are coming out of a pretty closely fought, though pretty handily won, election. That said, there are still upwards of 60 million Americans who did not vote for the team that is coming into power. And we live in the United States. We live in a world where it's very it's very bifurcated, meaning there are only two sides, and you have lost any and all discussion in the middle. So the words on both, the language used on both sides is very, very heated. The implications of legislation passing are always draconian. Which leads us to, you have to actually disengage. You have to take a step back. You have to, and we do this on a daily basis because unfortunately we're now living in a world where we are tracking the Twitters and the Twitters and the Truth Socials and all the other media channels. Before we send anything to a client, the rule right now is you need to see it confirmed 3 places. I would ask that you all, if you're tracking down a rumor, you've heard something, please, 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 before you get too concerned about it, try and find 3 different sources confirming it. I know that means we have to do our homework, but yes, we do have to do our homework. We are not being fed the full story. So aside from, you find your 3 sources to confirm it, and you take a deep breath. Because recall, while the Trump administration does enjoy chaos, does enjoy disruption, they really don't have the ability to turn on a dime. They cannot do things as quickly as they think they can. But Ron, I couldn't agree with you more here on the word hysteria. This is a very, very charged issue. And there are folks on both sides that use it to pay their salaries. And that's what we keep. People have vested interests in this. And they are going to use rhetoric that is meant to inflame their supporters and get them and engage them and get them to do action. Well, generally people don't do action unless they're very, 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 very worried. Well, you don't get very worried unless the rhetoric is very concerning. So you turn up the rhetoric to as concerning as you possibly can.
Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I agree with everything that John just said and you've said. And the last thing that I would add is, if you're thinking of coming to the United States, the numbers are still the numbers, which is to say the visa retrogression hasn't changed. There's still the same amount of visas out there. It's a retrogression right now of 2 years, which I can tell you historically is actually very normal and common. And even if it got to 2 or 3 years, that's historically not uncommon, and literally tens of thousands of nurses, both Ron's group at Worldwide Health Staff and my group at Musillo and Holt, have filed over the years with retrogressions of 2 or 3 years. And then the last thing I'd say is you need to really, sort of extending on what John said, focus on the things that you can control. What you can control is passing your NCLEX exam, passing your English fluency exam, finding a good employer who's going to really support you through the process, working with a great recruiter like Worldwide Health Staff in order to help you navigate both the immigration game and the employee game. Those are the things that you can control. Get your petition filed, get it approved, and don't worry so much about the things you can't control. As much as John and I spend in DC, and John lives there and spends much more time there, no one really calls us up and asks our opinion. We have to pick up the phone and tell them what we think our opinion is. So even someone like John Russell, who has worked in DC, in and around DC for 25 years, still only has so much that he can control. Everyone else of us have virtually no control over it. So control the things that you can control, and definitely keep an eye on some of these other big picture issues, but don't over index on them because you can't control.
Thank you. CJ, next slide, please. I think one thought I'd like to leave just as we prepare for our question and answer period, and Chris, you touched on some of this. It is possible to secure your American dream, and there are things that are within your control, primarily getting prepared and getting started. That means preparing for, taking, and passing the NCLEX exam, evaluating your U.S. employment opportunities, and thoroughly understanding the differences between those different employment opportunities. They are not all the same. They can, in fact, be dramatically different. So it's important that you inform yourself there. I think has been said numerous times today, legal employment-based immigration will continue. Processing times will fluctuate. And I think rather than being obsessed on whether the priority date is currently 23 months or 18 months or 28 months, until you get a petition filed, your processing time is infinite. So getting started, getting a petition filed today, all things being equal, is going to be issued a visa ahead of a petition filed 1 month from today. So processing times, yeah, of course, it's interesting, it's important. You have to plan for your future. But the real question, the real priority needs to be, how do I get my application started as soon as possible? The American dream does remain alive and well. We see it every day. We see it every week as nurses are arriving to employers in various places around the country. And most importantly, regardless of where in the world you are, and I see we have people joining us from many, many different countries today, remember that there are thousands that have gone before you, and you can do it as well. So hopefully that provides some encouragement to you, even when there's times of some uncertainty. The first thing is to take that first step and to get started. Once you do that, the rest is going to take care of itself. Next slide, please, CJ.
Ron, if I could add one last thing to that.
Sure, please.
Yes, please continue to control what you can control, because we desperately want you. Yeah. I think that you are wanted, your skills are wanted, and you will be welcomed here in the United States.
Very good. So we now have a little bit of time for Q&A. I've seen many case-specific questions come in from candidates that have applications in process. We're not going to take time today to answer case-specific questions. I would refer you to your case manager to gain further clarification on any questions you may have specifically on your case. CJ, what I'd like us to do is focus on questions that are more general in nature, that just talk about, the issues that have been discussed here this morning. And before we just jump into that, I am going to very quickly apologize. I'm going to jump off. I've got something has come up here. But CJ, I'll leave you to guide and support John and Chris through our Q&A, and then to wrap us up so we're all done, no later than 10 a.m.
All right. Yeah, no problem,
Sure.
Ron.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so let's start with our Q&A session. So we have some questions from the chat. Let's start with this one from Sila, and I'll pin that question. So do you think the visa bulletin for the coming months for the fiscal year will be affected negatively, especially for EB3 row?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that one. I think the reality is that the EB3 rest of the world we will see a positive movement in the January visa bulletin. So I do not think that it will be negative. However, come the summer, as we get near the end of the fiscal year, at that point, I do think that it will freeze or maybe retrogress, but never worry about that summer. That's really just indicating that we are near the end of the U.S. fiscal year, which is September 30th. So short answer is I think it will actually progress, which is to say move ahead in the forthcoming months, but maybe come June or July, it may retrogress.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Next question is from Pope. Please, will nurses from Nigeria be banned or denied visa under this current Donald Trump regime, especially those using the EB3 visa?
I can jump onto this. We don't think so, because we think the EB3 will in fact it will get us out of what could happen with country bans. We do expect that the Trump administration will try to bring in some sort of temporary ban on immigration from countries of concern. However, we believe that the administration will keep out what they consider to be legal and quote unquote good immigration that brings value to the United States.
Okay, thanks, John. Next question is from Cherry. What is this immigration invasion invoking a rule or whatever Trump wants to do to stop immigration for giving jobs to foreigners?
So this, I think, is a little bit where we were talking about some of the hysteria surrounding what is a very concerning issue. And I want to say that we certainly appreciate concerns people will have. I think what you have to see here is and I think, Cherry, what you're getting at is the Trump administration's plan to remove illegal, undocumented immigrants that pose a national security threat. Again, you're thinking about criminals. You're thinking about those that have criminal records when they arrived, and those that have those that have committed crime in the United States. That is the focus here. There is an understanding amongst even the president, the president-elect, that this country does need immigrants to keep it moving. I would argue that even the president's own businesses need immigrants to keep its business moving. The focus here is on undocumented immigrants that pose a threat to national security.
Okay, thanks, John. Next question is from Enoch. Is it advisable to look for alternate visas like H-1B, or should I wait till you get an interview in this current political moment?
I mean, this is really a question, Enoch, that you'll want to go over with your recruiter and your lawyer, because just wanting an H-1B is very, I mean, that's not really the right question. There's a lot to qualifying for an H-1B. If you are waiting on an interview for an EB3 and you are, say, documentarily qualified, I would almost surely stay that path, because you're very close to coming to the United States. But one of the things that I always counsel in these kinds of questions that happens to a lot of people is they're in this process for a year and a half or maybe 20 months, and they're very close to the end, and they start to get frustrated because it's taking longer than perhaps what they expected when they first started the process. And so they want to switch their path here when they're very close to the end. And so if you're 6 or 9 months to becoming current, by no means should you be switching your path. I know it's frustrating because maybe you had expected it to only take a year and now you're already at over a year and you're still seeing it 6 months out. But the way you want to think about it is not what was my thinking in 2022 when my case was filed. It's what's the most realistic path today.
Okay, thanks. Next one is from Rima. So what is the expectation of EB3 visa? Is it going to be affected, or on the good scenario, retrogression will be released?
Well, Chris, maybe we both can tag team on this one.
Yeah.
We believe that the program is stable and strong and will continue. However, we do believe that because of the existing backlog, that retrogression sticks with us for a little bit. And then I will kick to Chris to be a little more specific on that.
Yeah, no, retrogression is definitely going to stay. There's no doubt about it. But these doomsday scenarios just aren't, they're not worth entertaining, honestly.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're done with our last question. And this is from Sharon. So the question is it possible to be petitioned for being overstayed, or what are other options to be able to have it legalized?
Yeah, this is probably my department.
Yeah.
So this one's pretty easy, Sharon, which is this is not a good question to be answered over the internet. You need a real professional, an immigration attorney, to actually look at your situation. In some overstay scenarios, it's very possible to become legalized, and in other overstay scenarios, it's not. And so you really need to hire an attorney to really take a good look at your personal situation. Number one. Number two, I can tell you just as a general rule, if you're overstaying, the longer you overstay, the worse it is for you. So it's very easy for all of us sometimes to push off doing things that might be difficult or expensive. But I can tell you, if you wait 6 months, it's going to be that much worse.
All right, thanks, Chris. Okay, so before I let you go, I just want to let our viewers know about our Facebook group, our Facebook page, that they can like and follow us in Facebook, so that you'll have some immigration updates and our new positions. It's always posted in Facebook. I'll post that in the chat. And also, we always have these webinars weekly, so keep tuned in. And also, please, if you have a nurse friend or a colleague that has passed the NCLEX and wants to work in the United States, we have this refer a nurse program that you will earn up to $250 for any successful referrals. Okay, so I think that's it for today, Chris and John. So do you have any last thoughts for this topic before ending the webinar?
I would just say I understand and appreciate how frustrating delays can be. The delays do not mean we don't want you. You are desperately needed here across the United States, and you will be welcomed here. The delays are unfortunately just part of our process. They are not an indictment of the program, of you, of the country you're coming from. It is just, in fact, that our system is somewhat slow and certainly broken.
Yeah, I agree. The nursing shortage in America, in the U.S., is going to be worse in the second half of this decade than it is today. So your talents are wanted. The U.S., for all of its convoluted immigration system, has long been accepting of immigrants. My mother was an immigrant, came to this country when she was 16. That process was arduous. In fact, it wasn't that long ago, and she couldn't even come over on a plane. They came over on a boat. Immigration's hard. This is hard. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's a great opportunity if you can get here to America, and we'd love to have you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.